The European Central Bank has the goal of making sure that the prices of everything that you and I buy goes up by 2% every single year. It's called the 2% inflation mandate. That means that it's their goal that a loaf of bread that costs €1 this year should cost 2 cents more next year and 4 cents more the year after that. The Federal Reserve in the United States has the exact same goal. Now, why, you might ask, could these central banks have this kind of a goal? Well, I looked up the strategy paper on the website of the European Central Bank where it explains their monetary policy. And what it says there is that economists agree that 2% inflation are the optimal number for an economy. Period. Well, not much of an explanation. And I assume that this is as unsatisfying to you as it is to me. And that's why in this video, we're going to discuss how inflation, that is printing money, which results in higher prices, is actually a hidden way of taxing the poor while the rich benefit, consequently widening the wealth gap between rich and poor. Now, there are certainly more factors that contribute to the wealth gap, but monetary policy is certainly the most systemic and the most covert of these factors. Everybody can see when a big bank gets bailed out and how that could influence the wealth gap, but monetary policy is a lot more subtle than that. So in this video, we're not going to look at how governments manage to legally print money to finance their spending. We're going to look at the effects that it has when a government chooses to use inflation to finance its government, and the effects that it has on different groups of people. Well, the effects are that savers will see the value of their savings dwindle. The working class will not see their real wages go up because of inflation, and the rich, who are immune to inflation, can actually benefit from it. All three together, obviously widening the gap. Now, how is it that printing money actually raises prices? Well, if you print money, that doesn't mean that the equivalent amount of stuff that could be bought with it just magically appears. On the contrary, that stuff that can be bought will stay the same, but all of a sudden you have a lot more currency in circulation. So the relationship of the two will change, and naturally you will need more currency to buy the same amount of stuff. Everybody can see that when one person gets twice as much money, this person can buy twice as much stuff with it. But if everybody has twice as much money and there's no more stuff to be bought, then nobody can buy anything more than before. It's like if the government would tell everybody to just take their bills and write an extra zero at the end of each bill so that a €10 bill becomes a €100 bill and a €100 bill becomes a €1,000 bill. Nothing would change because everything would just be multiplied by a factor of 10. The amount of stuff that's around will still be the same. Well, if this were the case, then the effect would be zero. The problem with inflation, however, with printing money is that the inflation is not spread equally amongst everybody. And that brings us to our first group, which is savers. Well, savers lose the value of their savings because inflation means a transfer of wealth from those who have saved up money to those who get to spend the newly printed money. Because those who get to spend that money can buy stuff with it. And while they do it, they drive up the prices of those things that they buy. Those who have been saving money, who don't get any newly printed money, they have to pay these higher prices, meaning that with their savings, they can now afford less than they were able to before. And we can see this. I'm sure you've heard, for example, your grandmother say something to the extent of, back in the day, a bottle of milk just used to be 5 cents, and today it's so expensive. So this has been happening for decades. Or to give you an example, let's say the government wants to buy a brand new set of fighter jets and chooses to print the money to buy these. That means that your frugal grandmother, who has been saving her entire life, who has never spent more than she earned, who always put something to the side for retirement, now that she's trying to live off of those savings in retirement, the government takes away 2% of that through inflation every single year, and every year she'll be able to afford less and less with her savings. Or take a little girl who has been taught that saving is a virtue, so she put everything, all of her pocket money that she gets into a little piggy bank. She starts doing that when she's 5. Well, by the time she's 18, she will already have lost a quarter of everything that she's saved in the first year. So to frame this in a picture, this means that your frugal grandmother and the little girl with her piggy bank, both of them pay for the government's brand new fighter jets. So we've seen what's happening to savers, but what's happening to the working class? Well, the working class will see their real incomes fall, and that is because Those who receive the printed money first benefit at the expense of those who get it last. And those who get it last are usually the workers. See, when the new money enters the system, nobody knows yet that there's all of this new money. So they can spend it at face value. And while it's entering the economy, it will drive up the prices until there is a balance again between all the goods and the stuff that's there to buy and the money that's in circulation. But until that happened, there will be a transfer of wealth to those who get to spend the money before it loses any of its value, and from those who have to pay the higher prices before their own incomes catch up to those new inflated prices. So to continue our example of the fighter jets, the government buys these fighter jets from a government contractor who gets to sell them at a government price, making a big profit. Of course, to fulfill the order, this contractor will have to buy lots of parts from many suppliers. And those suppliers all of a sudden also get big new orders and can make big profits on those. What's happening at the same time is that they drive up the prices for everything that goes into a fighter jet. For example, aluminum. So you will see on the world market, the price of aluminum goes up. Now what happens if the price of aluminum goes up? That means that everything that has aluminum in it will go up in price as well. So everything from a soda can to a bag of chips will be more expensive. Now if you're on a fixed income like a worker and all of a sudden all these things are more expensive, you will see your cost of living rise, and therefore you can afford less and your real income will decline. Now at some point, these companies with these big new profits, the contractors and the suppliers, all of them will start to expand and compete for labor. And that's when the wages will catch up to the new prices. But until that happens, the workers have to pay higher prices without their income having been adjusted yet. So their real incomes decline. And since inflation is something that's happening continuously, that means that the wages are always playing catch up with the price inflation. Now you could say the government shouldn't print money to buy fighter jets, it should print money to pay unemployment benefits. Well, all that would mean is that you're taking from the poor who are working in order to give to the poor who are not working anymore. And those would actually drive up consumer prices more directly because that's what they spend their money on. So it doesn't matter whether you're financing fighter jets or unemployment benefits. The worst way to do it is through inflation, because inflation primarily hits the working class. So savers lose the value of their savings while the working class see their real incomes decline. Well, what about the rich? The rich are immune to inflation, and in fact they can benefit from it. And here's why. The rich have only a fraction of their wealth in cash, and cash, as we've seen repeatedly in this video, loses its value. They have the majority of their wealth in assets like commodities, real estate, or stock in companies. Well, all of these assets have prices themselves, and prices, as we've seen, will rise. So the wealth of the rich, for example, oil or houses, will rise correspondingly with the price inflation, and they're not affected by it. But to the extent that they own stock in companies that benefit from the money printing, they can actually themselves benefit from the money printing. Because the jet builders, the aluminum sheet manufacturers, the raw materials producers, all these companies have higher profits, can pay higher dividends, and their stock value will rise even more than the price inflation. So while the savers and working class are losing on inflation, the rich can actually benefit from it, obviously widening the gap. Now there is supposedly one argument that's for inflation, and that is that if prices were falling, which would be the opposite of inflation, and people knew that, they would stop spending because they would always be waiting for the time when the goods that they want to buy are cheaper. And when people stop spending, the economy would stagnate. Well, this claim is easily refuted if we just look at technology. Technology is an area where innovation has been outpacing inflation for a long time, meaning that prices are falling despite the fact that governments are printing money. So look at cell phones, for example. A cell phone used to cost thousands, if not 10,000s of, for example, dollars in the 80s, and you didn't have service anywhere. Today, you can buy a smartphone for $150 and you have service everywhere. And this whole 40 years, people have been buying more and more smartphones while they were getting cheaper and cheaper. And if you buy a computer today, you know that next year there's probably going to be a computer that's better and cheaper, but you're still going to buy your computer when you need it. Now there is one factor that I haven't mentioned yet that affects price inflation, and that's the so-called velocity of money. That is the degree to which people are willing to spend their money freely. So it's something very psychological. And this factor can offset or accelerate the effects that money printing by the government has on consumer prices. And it's really relevant during a crisis, as it is right now. Right now, the United States government is printing trillions of dollars, while you don't see consumer prices go up that much yet. And that is because the velocity has gone down drastically. People just aren't spending, and that's because either they have lost their jobs, or they're afraid to lose their jobs, or because the economy is in lockdown and there's not much to spend your money on. So these things make velocity go down, and that's why you don't see the rise in prices yet. But once the economy opens up again and people start spending all this money that has been created, it will drive up the prices. And the worst thing that can happen is when people realize how fast prices are going up and they lose trust in the currency itself. And the worst thing that can happen is that it loses all of its value. And that is something called hyperinflation, which is happening in Venezuela right now, which has happened in Zimbabwe a couple years ago, which happened even in Germany about 9 years ago. So this would be the worst case scenario. The reason why I've ignored this factor is that the government cannot control velocity, but the government can control how much money it's printing. And when the government is printing money, we've seen that savers lose the value of their savings, the working class don't see their real incomes increase, the government of course benefits because they can spend the newly printed money, and the companies who get the money first make big profits on it and benefit, and thereby benefiting those rich people who own these companies. And these are the reasons why using inflation to finance government spending is the worst way to tax the people, because it always hits the poor the most. But at the same time, it's the most hidden way to tax the people, because they don't really know that they're being taxed this way. And that is why the European Central Bank has a mandate by its member countries to print money, or as they would say, to create the optimal amount of inflation.